Well, let's get straight into it. Good morning and good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends. Those of you who are joining us from the Middle East and elsewhere, good afternoon, early good evening to all of us on this important discussion we're having today. Welcome to the annual event of the United Nations Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, held on the margins of the Commission on the Status of Women. My name is Neville Hertzer, and I'm a Vice Chair of the committee, and I'm also the permanent representative of Namibia to the United Nations. On behalf of the committee, let me express our appreciation for your being here with us today. Since the creation in 1975, the General Assembly has regularly renewed the mandate of the committee to promote the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination as provided by international law and enshrined in the UN Charter. As per its mandate, the committee raises awareness on the question of Palestine and the challenges faced daily by the Palestinian population. And in so doing, it engages with civil society in the occupied Palestinian territory, in Israel and elsewhere. The committee's activities aim at mobilizing efforts to end the Israeli occupation and at achieving the realization of the two-state solution and a sustainable peace. On the 30th of November 2022, the General Assembly adopted the resolution A/72/23. That resolution calls on the committee to dedicate its activities in 2023 to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Nakba. Building upon the General Assembly's request, and drawing from the Commission on the Status of Women's 67th session, today's event is dedicated to discussing the memories of the impact of the Nakba on Palestinians, to highlight the challenges faced by Palestinians, including women, and disseminate reflections on the long-lasting trauma inflicted upon generations of Palestinians through dispossession and exile. The Nakba, which refers to the pivotal and catastrophic events of the spring of 1948 that led to the loss of life, displacement, imprisonment, and dispossession of thousands of Palestinians, seemingly continues to this day through dispossession, expulsions from their homes and lands, and collective punishment and annexation. The events of 1948 and their persistent repercussions to this day have shaped the collective identity of Palestinians. Oral tradition has preserved the history of the Nakba, and Palestinian women have been central in preserving and sharing their heritage, their memory, and their culture. As a continuation of this legacy, Palestinian female authors have been unearthing the history of the Nakba through their essays, novels, and movies. It gives me special pleasure today that we can be joined to have a presentation and discussing the Oranges from Jaffa, the title of a book by Nadine Sayegh. Welcome, Sayegh. We are pleased to have you with us today. Our guest author, Ms. Sayegh, was born in Beirut. She grew up in Vienna. She studied business administration in Canada and worked in managing positions in the private sector for over 20 years. She currently lives with her family in Vienna. Her novel narrates the coming-of-age story of her father, Nicholas Sayegh, a Palestinian boy whose carefree childhood in Jaffa ends abruptly when his family and other Palestinians had to flee during the Nakba. At the same time, the memory of the Nakba and its impact on the author's father and her family is presented in a unique way, offering a rare glimpse into the vibrant and affluent fabric of Palestinian society before 1948. The story is also sprinkled with many details about the Palestinian culture, including social norms, cuisine, and language. Using archival documents, the book also shows how the Nakba was part of a process that started decades earlier and ended with the dispossession and expulsion of a people from its land. That's just by way of introducing and starting our discussion for this morning. And so now, let us start with our program. I will first give the floor to Ambassador Feda Abdelhadi Nasir, the Deputy Permanent Observer of the Observer State of Palestine to the United Nations. Thereafter, we will hear from Ms. Sayegh, and after her presentation, we will open the floor for questions and comments from committee members and observers and from the audience. Let me add that while participation in the virtual platform will be limited to UN member and observer states, as well as the panelists, the general public can watch the event on the UN Web TV, and you can send your questions via the committee Facebook page, the Twitter account, the email at dpr meeting@un.org, and WhatsApp. You can use the number +1 646 421 0579. The event is recorded and streamed live on UN Web TV, and it will be posted on unispal.un.org, the committee's website maintained by the Division for Palestinian Rights. And I thank the division for their support in organizing today's event. Now, let us start, and let me ask Ambassador Feda Abdelhadi Nasir, Deputy Permanent Observer of the State of Palestine to the United Nations, to share some remarks with us. Feda, welcome and good morning, and over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Reza, and our thanks as well to the members of the committee and the Bureau of the UN Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People for convening this special event, and for all of the initiatives and efforts in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all who are with us in this event. It is an honor for me to join Ambassador Goetze in welcoming Ms. Nadine Sayegh, author of Oranges from Jaffa, The End of the Golden Age of Palestine, to share this poignant story with us, reflecting on the life of her father in Palestine as a young teenage boy at the time of the Nakba, and reflecting on the grave and historic injustice done to the Palestinian people in the Nakba and ever since. I personally read Oranges from Jaffa in the fall of last year and was deeply moved by her depictions of the innocence, the beauty, and the charm of life in Palestine before the Nakba, of all that existed culturally and socially, nationally, of families and communities, of schools and libraries, of cafes and cinemas, of businesses and orange groves exporting around the world, and of simple childhoods and a vibrant life, the Palestine that our elders told us many stories about, with pride and love for what was, and with sadness and regret for all that was lost. Although, like many of you, I've read countless reports and analysis on the question of Palestine, I have found that stories such as this, with Palestinian authors themselves telling the Palestinian story, have significant impact. They help us to humanize a people who have been so cruelly dehumanized, to tell our story honestly and emotionally with all its richness and all its sadness, to share the history of a people who have not only been dispossessed and displaced from their homeland, but whose oppressor and colonizer continues its violent and unlawful attempts to not only displace them, but erase them and their history. So thank you, Nadine, for sharing your father's story and factual reflections about the events of that time to help those who will hopefully read the book to better understand the Palestinian reality before the Nakba and to better understand the meaning and impact of this ongoing Nakba for Palestinians, of the loss of lives and of living, and of the painful sorrow and scars it has left, of a civilization and people shattered to pieces. But as was noted, this is not only a historical reflection, but relevant to the present day to understand the continuing struggle of the Palestinian people for justice and for the attainment of their rights, including to freedom and to return, and the continuing longing for Palestine and continuing quest for a life of dignity and peace in their homeland that they have so long been deprived of, as Israel persists with its brutality against them, violating with impunity all of their rights and carrying on with their dispossession and displacement. Such longing and aspirations persist generation after generation, despite all that has been suffered and lost by millions of Palestine refugees, by millions of Palestinians under occupation, and by millions of Palestinians in the diaspora. Telling this story 75 years since the onset of the Nakba is a testament to the enduring impact of the Nakba as a pivotal traumatic event in the lives of Palestinians, but also of their enduring resilience and perseverance in the pursuit of justice and their inalienable rights, telling their story from every corner of the world. Across generations, they have remained insistent on their rights and their rightful place in their homeland and seek not only acknowledgement and understanding of their history, but also support, solidarity, and empathy for their just cause. And there are so many remarkable stories of resilience among our people, from young to old, mothers, fathers, children, elders, refugees, prisoners, all proving that even in the darkest moments, they are firm in their belief that we will one day know justice and live in peace. It is in this spirit that I again warmly welcome with us Ms. Nadine Sayegh, and we are honored to share Nadine's work with the United Nations and broader international community as we come together in the 75th year since the 1948 Nakba to reflect on the immense suffering, injustice, and loss borne by the Palestinian people, and to recommit to acting to ensuring for them justice, freedom, and peace. Welcome, Ms. Sayegh.
Ambassador Abdelhadi Nasir, thank you very much for those heartfelt introduction and comments, and for framing the issues of our event today. Indeed, we are at another crisis moment in the struggle of the Palestinian people, and you are reminding us timely of the enduring resilience and persistence of the Palestinian people that requires our continued solidarity and support in helping to bring justice and helping them realize their right to self-determination, freedom, independence, and a return to their homeland. Ms. Sayegh, we are all ears, waiting to hear this story from your vantage point, from your own words, as we need continued inspiration on our journey as we try to deal with this unresolved cause of all of us. Nasir, thank you for participating in today's event. We are all eager to hear about your book and your family's memories of the Nakba. I understand that you will read some excerpts from the book and share some reflections. During the presentation, we will also show a slideshow with some photos of your family and photos of old Jaffa. So to start our discussion, could you tell us a bit more about your book and what encouraged you to share your family story? Ms. Nadine Sayegh, over to you and welcome.
Unmute, please.
Thank you, Fida.
Very good. Welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very, very honored to be invited and convened to this event, and I'm very happy to be able to share our family story with you. So going back to your question about what encouraged me to write this book, you see, I was born in Lebanon, but really I grew up in Austria with my family. And these stories that I have collected in the book really are our bedtime stories that my father, who was born in 1936 in Palestine and still lives, used to tell us and share with us. And you see, my childhood and that of my two brothers is completely different of his. I grew up in the 1980s in Vienna, and he grew up in the 1930s and 40s in Jaffa. So his stories were so extraordinary that I felt an urge a few years ago to capture these stories and to keep them, because to me, my father is a time witness. Now you see, I live in Austria, in Vienna, and we have this concept of time witnesses. Usually we refer to that when it comes to the Second World War and what people have experienced during the Second World War. And I see my father as a time witness as well. My father was born in 1936 in the country that was called Palestine. And he's the last generation of people who can, it seems to me, he's the last generation of people who can claim to still have been born in Palestine. So for me, it was an urge, and I felt it as a necessity to make sure that we can collect these stories. And originally, I just wanted to have these stories kept and collected for my children and the children of my two brothers. Collectively, we have there's seven grandchildren coming from this family. All of us live in Austria. And I just wanted to maintain these stories for them and to maintain their pride also in being descendants of Palestine. And so really the idea was to keep these stories for posterity. And I figured, well, if we have these stories for the children, that's good. In the best of cases, this could be interesting to more people outside of the Sayegh family. And so I have written this book together with my father, and it seemed that indeed there was an interest outside of just the family. And again, I'm very happy to be here with you. But if it's fine with you, I'd rather just start and read a few pages from the book so as to put you in the bath, so to say. I start from the very beginning.
Please proceed, and we are eagerly waiting to listen to extracts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I got my first bodyguard when I was 11. His name was Jamil, and he was 16. Jamil was half Mapuche from Chile. With his slingshot, he could hit a wasp in flight. He was one of a kind. My father hired him after a kid at school had attacked me with a pocket knife. For Jaffa in 1947, it was a scandal. No one carried a knife around in their pocket, much less pupils in a private school. At the time, Jaffa was one of the safest and probably also one of the most beautiful places in the world. The city had existed since ancient times. Jaffa, jewel of the Mediterranean, right next to the newly built city of Tel Aviv. Jaffa, blue sky and summer breezes, spiced with the salty tang of freedom, and always, always the scent of orange blossom. Jaffa, center of the citrus trade and refined good living. The men wore suits and ties and red feathers on their heads. The women wore long dresses and smiles on their faces. They rode through the streets in horse-drawn carriages or took the bus. Like all boys our age, we children got up to all kinds of mischief. We played soccer, we rode donkeys as if we were cowboys. We accidentally broke windows while kicking a ball around. Once we broke a police woman's window. That was bad luck. We liked to play hide and seek best when it was already dark. We drove our mothers to despair and made our fathers livid with rage. If they got too angry, we would run off with our tails between our legs, but laughing. Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Nicholas Sayegh. That's who I am. Our family history goes back to 720. We're Palestinian Christians. My father's name is Bshara Sayegh. He owns several orange plantations in Jaffa, along with apartment buildings and a factory. Lots of land, lots of fruit, lots of life. My mother is Rose Zarife. She also owned a number of orange groves and apartment buildings. They met at the dentist. She, a tender 21-year-old, he already 40. They knew each other by sight. He was wearing a black tie, mourning for his mother. They exchanged meaningful glances in the waiting room. Both of them were holding their cheeks because of the toothache. They managed to exchange a few words as they were waiting to be treated. The dialogue followed a certain ritual, the words traditionally spoken to express condolences. I wish you a long life. My condolences, Monsieur Bshara. Thank you, Mademoiselle Rose. May you live long. Such is life. Parting is difficult. Yes, but there's always a new beginning. It's important to have faith. It gives us comfort and meaning to life. Do your grace and beauty come from God or from your dear mother? Ah, now you're trying to flatter me. You have such a pleasant voice. Do you sing? Not really, but thank you for the compliment, Bshara. Do you live in this nice neighborhood? Yes, not far from here. Do you come here often? Not if I can help it. Ah, the doctor is calling. It's my turn. Maybe we can carry on talking afterwards. I'll be there. So you could say that I started life thanks indirectly to a painful molar, as did my sister Frida and my younger brothers, Tony and George. We all have dental origins. In our neighborhood, I was famous for getting into trouble, a rascal of the first order. We lived on top of Jabal Araqtinji Hill, which had been settled mostly by Christians in the district of Ajami. In Arabic, this means Persian, a discreet reminder that Persians had also once pitched their tents there. The hill we lived on was like a miniature Tower of Babel, and the name was reminiscent of the Ottomans. Jabal Araqtinji, the mountain on which Araq is made. It's perhaps a bit of an exaggeration to call it a mountain, but it was nonetheless a steep hill. The main road meandered like a tired boa up to the summit, if you could call it that. There were lots of small streets, lanes, and alleys branching off from both sides of this main street, the end of which offered a panoramic vista as far as the horizon. And that's where our house was, the Sayegh Villa. It's still here today, not far from the stone steps going down if you take back to Ajami and if you're sure-footed enough. The families at the top of the hill had old Christian names with long historical roots. Saliba means cross. Khuri means priest. Zarife means beautiful. Farah means joy. Beirut means from Beirut, and Sayegh, that's us, means goldsmith. Today, you could call it a respectable neighborhood. There was never any need to lock the door. The family name was better than any lock, and mutual trust better than an insurance policy. Thank you.
Nadine, thank you very much for those insightful comments and personal perspectives on the Nakba and its significance, your family and for Palestinians. This is such a fascinating intros that I am almost tempted to ask you to read the whole book to us, but I'm sure all of us will be looking forward to get a copy and familiarize ourselves with such a rich story of the rich tradition and culture and experiences of your family, and to remind us of where we come from and what is still ahead of us in overcoming the real challenge that we all face. Excellencies, colleagues, I would now like to open the floor for comments and questions by committee members and observers, and from the audience. We will collect a few questions first, and then ask Ms. Nadine to respond to it. I wonder if Secretariat could help me indicate if there are any takers that wish to engage with Ms. Nadine at this point.
Questions for now, but maybe we give them a second to see if people want to engage and ask a question. Yes, thank you.
Sure. I think while we are waiting to see if there are any comments or any questions at this point, I would like to just suggest to or ask Ms. Nadine, as we are at this point thinking back to the Nakba and reading and listening to your father's story, I'm wondering if you think that this book of yours, this story of yours, the history of pre-Nakba Palestine, can help better understand the present situation that we are faced with, and if so, how is this going to be of assistance to us? Just some ideas from your part on how you see your book, the story, help us to better understand the present situation. Could you unmute again, please?
Yes. Thank you for a very good question. I really believe that the book is very useful in explaining the situation, because the feedback that I receive when I actually do book readings, and I have done quite a few of them, is that the audience, at least in Europe, or if I may say maybe in Austria, is not knowledgeable of what happened in 1948. I can really say the questions, or what I hear from them coming back at me, is they always say, we didn't know. We never learned about that in school. We're completely unaware. This was somehow shrouded behind a veil. We didn't know this side of the story. Everybody in Europe has learned about the Second World War and the Holocaust and all the atrocities, but somehow there's a hiatus when it comes to the Nakba. Nobody knows exactly what has happened. And so the feedback that I get most often from readers of the book is that it was completely enlightening to them. They didn't know anything about it. They're actually surprised, and that it actually helps them understand the news, and that it helps them to frame the news, because they somehow think that it is a religious conflict, and they realize that actually it is not a religious conflict. And so this is mostly the feedback that I get. So I have a feeling that by putting this story together in a palatable way, without it being too heavy, yes, because as Ambassador Abdelhadi Nasir said at the beginning, it is a sort of, and you said at the beginning, it is a sort of Tom Sawyer in Palestine. Yes, it's an easy read. It's a nice little story. We have stories like this in many cultures. In French culture, we have Le Petit Nicolas. In German culture, we have Max and Moritz. We have, so in every culture, you have those little boys and girls and their childhood stories. And so here we have created this little Nicholas from Palestine, who recounts and who explains what happened at the time.
Thank you. I fully agree with you. I come from history also where we had a hard and long struggle for our freedom and independence. And what we face with today is 32 years after independence, a new generation of Namibians have been born post the liberation of our country and may not necessarily have the same appreciation or maybe recollection or history of what it took to be free. And I think these kind of contributions, these stories would be helpful in reminding and in keeping a connection of the new generation to the history of their people and to better understand and appreciate what it took to get where we are as Namibians today, and certainly in your case, a much longer struggle and battle that I hope would also help the rest of the global community through this story get a better glimpse, a better understanding of where you come from, what the struggle is all about, and to rededicate and commit ourselves to support a peaceful solution to this long-standing conflict. I'm trying to get a sense if there are any other comments or any
Ambassador,
questions?
yes. For now, I think maybe we can ask Nadine if she wants to show her presentation. So maybe that can trigger, some questions also among members and observers and the audience, maybe. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nadine. Would you please proceed?
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you, Miriam. Can we please have the first slide? Yes, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So what we have put together here in this slideshow, in this presentation, is we have a few photos from the old Jaffa and then a few photos from the new Jaffa, just to put you in the bars, so to say. So here you see a picture of the port of Jaffa, taken about more than 100 years ago. Jaffa is a very, very old city. Jaffa is actually more than 4,000 years old. And some people believe that Jaffa was the very first port in the world. Yes. So what we see here, this view of the port and these fishermen, there has been fishermen for over 4 millennia going about their trade. And Jaffa being a port was very important for the economic expansion and the economic might of Jaffa. Jaffa in the 1940s was probably the strongest, economically speaking, city in all of Palestine, precisely because of its orange and citrus trade. And all those, the export of oranges and citrus was actually being managed through the Jaffa port, and they were selling the oranges and citrus to European cities mainly. And Jaffa also had another relevance from a touristic point of view. Not only is it very beautiful, of course, but at the time, many, many tourists from Europe used to come to Jaffa on their way to the Holy Land. They wanted to go to Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth, of course, and to many other places. But so Jaffa was the entry point and the entry port into Palestine. So Jaffa has really been at the crossroads for millennia with other cultures. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this view of Jaffa is the complete opposite of it, if you want. Here we are actually up on a hill on one of those old Jaffa hotels, looking down on the city towards the sea. And towards the city, you see the sea in the background. And what you see in the foreground is quite interesting because this doesn't exist like that anymore. You see actually Jaffa as a city with all these orange groves and the palm and date palm trees. You see Jaffa as this city really fixated on agricultural produce. And basically you see the exports from Jaffa here on this picture. Unfortunately, these orange orchards don't exist anymore. There are some, of course, still, but not to this extent. But I find it interesting that about 100 years ago, Jaffa was still that lush and that green as it was. This is a picture that is particularly interesting also because I showed it to my father and he had something interesting to say about it. Now, of course, this is like the city center of Jaffa, if you want. It is the Clock Tower Square, which is the place where everybody meets, where today and back then you had the coffee shops, the places, the place where people used to gather. But the house that we see in the middle is called the Zarifiyye, after the Zarife family, my grandmother. So the family of my grandmother owned this block, and they were renting it out to merchants who had small shops, to doctors, to lawyers. They even had a cabaret with Arabic dancing and songs. So it was like, if you wanted, it was a sort of shopping mall at the time. Thank you, Miriam. So this is, again, the book is called Jaffa, Oranges from Jaffa. So really everything revolves about the orange. So we thought it's worthwhile to actually look at this a little bit closer. So here on the right-hand side, you see the workers doing the packing. I mean, these oranges were destined for export to Europe, yes, to very refined taste buds in Europe. So here what the men are doing, they're actually wrapping individually every orange, making sure and doing a very stringent quality control, making sure that there's no rotten oranges that actually come into the crates. And so they wrap every orange individually, checking, and then they put it into the crates. And if you look at the left-hand side, I think it's a very beautiful photo where you see how then they do a second quality control. They put the oranges in the crates, wooden crates, by the way, and then they nail them. And I found it very amusing to see that the marketing back then was as great as ever. The oranges are of the brand St. Peter. We even see St. Peter's key. I suppose that they tasted heavenly. But you see with what really quality control was something that was very important. So these were high quality export products. Yes, thank you. This is the famous Al-Hamra cinema. This is not a cinema anymore. Today, I think it hosts the Church of the Scientology in Jaffa. But it was designed and constructed as a cinema by a Lebanese architect, I believe, in the 1920s. As you can see, it is magnificent. I think it is, I don't know what is the style, maybe Bauhaus, but you will see a Palestinian flag on top of the cinema. And it plays an important role in my book because, of course, this was the place for fun and recreation. And at some point in time, my father, as a young boy, he really wants to see a film. And he ducks out of school with his best friend, and they go to the cinema, but they don't tell their mothers. And so the mothers are very upset because the boys don't turn up after school, and they go looking for them. And eventually they go into the Al-Hamra cinema where they find the boys and they drag them out of their ears, out of the cinema. And now, of course, they had a good laugh about it, but at the time they didn't find it so much fun. But the cinema was a very important place in Jaffa, of course. Thank you. So now we move into the present. Last year, I have been invited to come to Jerusalem and present my book. The book was initially published in German, in Austria, in Vienna, and then I was asked to translate it into English and to come present it at the Willy Brandt Center in Jerusalem. And so, of course, I was more than happy to oblige. And there is, in one chapter, I described the summer vacation of a Palestinian family, because really I'm describing ordinary life of a Palestinian family. And so the family used to always go to Beit Jala, to this Everest Hotel. It was called Everest Hotel because it was on top of a small hill. Yes, maybe Everest is a bit grandiose, but it was a beautiful hotel, and you can see how it looked like in the 1940s. And when I went to Beit Jala to visit it 75 years later, this is what it looks like. Yes, it is still owned by somebody from the same family back then, but really you see the barbed wire and the windows and the way they look like. It was, I have to say, disheartening experience. While I was very happy that the hotel still exists and is still used as a hotel, but it is, of course, the days of glory are long over. And here you see the view, because in the book also I talk about the view. used to be essentially a beautiful view because you're on top of a mountain looking down the hill, and the weather in Beit Jala is much better than in sun-scorched Jaffa, which is very, very hot in the summer. So people escaped. The Jaffaians would escape to Beit Jala to come and spend their summer vacation here. And at the time, they had a beautiful view. This is the view we have there today. Thank you. So on this photo, I would like to share with you the pictures of some of the protagonists in the story. So in the middle, you have Nicholas Sayegh, who's about an infant of 1.5 years on this photo. Unfortunately, we do not have photos of him at the time, yes, from when he was about 10 or 12, because they were lost in the Nakba when they had to flee. At the bottom of the slide, on the right-hand side, you see Bshara Sayegh, my grandfather, who's the protagonist in the story and who's mentioned very often as he's one of the main characters. And you see on the right-hand side, again, and on the extreme left, Badia Zarife, who is my great-grandmother, and with her husband Salim and their first son, Jean. And sometimes in Vienna, I have people who are surprised at the way my relatives are dressed, because somehow they have a different conception of how people could have dressed in the Middle East or in other places around this time. Some people actually say that I still look a little bit like Badia Zarife, which is very nice, but it is amusing to see how genetics sometimes play down across generations. Yes, and this is the last slide. So on the right-hand side, you see my father and my son, Benedict, and myself in 2017, when we actually traveled to the Holy Land. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to write this book. So I said, look, Dad, we can't do it all from our desks in Vienna. We have to travel there and to go look at the house, go to Jaffa, smell the air, look at the flowers, just soak up on all these flavors and scents and get a sense of what it was, so as to get inspiration to write an engaging story. So here you see us on the day when we actually went to visit the house, which was, I have to say, a very emotional one, because we didn't know who owns the house and we didn't know if the person was going to open the door. My dad, having worked for the United Nations, for UNRWA actually, he had been to the house maybe 20 years before that. And at the time, the owner was a Jewish, very friendly lady who was kind enough to let him in, and they had a nice conversation. And at the time, she told him that she had actually lived in Vienna, which we thought was a odd story. But in any case, now we live in Vienna. She lives in the house in Jaffa anyway, reversal of courses. Now there is a Palestinian family, very kind Palestinian family, who lives in the house, and they were very nice. They invited us in and we were able to go around. But it was a very emotional moment, of course, because my father, of course, recognized many things, and the tiles, they had beautiful tiles on the floor. They're still the same and still very well conserved. And our son Benedict is 12 here. On the photo, the age that my father was when they were actually bombed out of Jaffa. And then a few years later, because it took a while to get this story together and written and published. So this was then last summer in June, when I was convened to come back to Jerusalem and present the book. I had the really big joy to come back to Jaffa, to knock on the door again, to be opened the door by this Palestinian family. And I was able to give them in hand a few copies of the book and to have a nice chat with them. And it was a very moving moment for me. So yes, these are the photos I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Nadine. I couldn't help but thinking of the real story when we are told that a picture speaks 1,000 words. These pictures really paints to us a picture of a time when life was normal.
Yes.
Where you can see boys going to the movie house, just like I did also. And I remember also being pulled out by my ears. So it was just how we are connected globally. And this just emphasizes the point that we need to bring that normalcy back to Palestine. I also can relate to the emotions of going back to place where you grew up or where your father grew up. I had similar experiences. And it does have a very emotional connection to our own lives and our own stories. Ambassador Feda, I wonder if you have an additional point you want to raise, or maybe just to engage with Nadine on any of the things we've heard. Perhaps we could even ask her to share a further extract from the book. I give over to Feda. Feda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Goetze. And thank you, Nadine, for the passage that you've read, the photos that you've shared. I think, there's just so many thoughts in my mind as well. And as Ambassador Goetze said, it raises a lot of emotions as we look at these photographs of what was Jaffa decades ago and consider now where it is and the plight of our people. And going back to the book, I just wanted to ask you, what, in your opinion, what is the most important scene in the book? And perhaps, as Ambassador Goetze said, you could share another passage with us. And also, if, what are the main takeaways that you want readers to take from the book, the main messages that you want to convey, if you could share that with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Feda. So to me, one of the most important passages is maybe one where we're at the beginning of May of 1948. And my father, all of a sudden, so they're living on top of this hill. And he says, Dad, I can hear the muezzin sing. Now, how strange is that? We could never hear him sing before. And his father says, yes, we can hear him sing because everybody has left Jaffa. The city has basically died. We can hear him because there is no more other noise to absorb the waves. And so he realizes that really there are just a very few people who are still in Jaffa. Most of the population, a big part of the population has left because they have been terrorized away, and they have gone. And in effect, after this moment, a few days later, on May 4th, 1948, they actually leave as well because the bombs fall too close to their house. They fall on a Coptic convent that still exists. That was their neighbor. They fall into the garden. And so at this point, my grandmother said, Shara, that's it, we're leaving. Because the family, of course, didn't want to leave because all their assets are invested in land, in orchards, in zarifiyya, in houses, in factories, etc., etc. So for them, leaving is really exposing oneself to a very bad situation. And my grandfather didn't want to leave. But after the grandmother saw everybody left, and specifically her best friend, Mary Farah, left, this is what triggered her. Because the day this bomb fell, her friend Mary Farah said, I'm out. That's it, I'm leaving. And so when her best friend left, she said to the husband, we're leaving too. Yes, sometimes it just comes down to that. Yes, the people who are important in your life, they take a decision, you just move along. And I think this is an important passage. About what I want people to take from the book, really it is only one thing. It is empathy. Because I don't feel much of that. Yeah, it is just empathy. But now, if you allow, I would be very happy to read a second passage of the book. And throughout the book, what I try to do is, like Feda said, there's a sprinkle of everything, of the food we eat, of the places we go, of the games we play, of the things we do. I mean, this is the life of very ordinary people. And had the Nakba not befell them, they would be living like many other people as well. Yes. But in contrast, now for the last 75 years, they've been trying to assert their rights. and just basically trying to have a shelter and safety and security and food on the table. And that has kept them very busy for the last 75 years. But before, this is how it was also. So just to help you connect the dots, Dad, being a rascal and always getting into trouble in school, has been stabbed by a boy in school, okay? And my grandfather will not take the law into his hands. He wants to go to a juvenile court. So this is what happens. We left the Sayegh villa and set off on foot for the court. My father was visibly seething. His steps were uncommonly heavy as his elegant shoes from London resounded loudly against the asphalt. Now they're playing with knives at school, he muttered into his beard. That's how far we've come. It's a tragedy, that's what it is. He was talking more to himself. Throughout his life, my father was always circumspect, reserved, and restrained when others were loud or rude. He was completely devoted to his family, loved his wife Rose, loved us 4 children. I was naturally sorry for the trouble I'd caused him, but I didn't feel I was to blame. I wasn't the one who had drawn the knife. For my father, though, it was a question of reputation. People were so quick to talk about you. Shara Sayegh, major landowner and businessman, has to accompany his son to juvenile court. Did you hear it all? Did you already know about that? Ah, yes, there was a knife fight or something like this. Really? Young Nicholas? The poor family, who would have thought, oh well, bad luck can strike everybody. What can you do? My father kept a lookout for acquaintances and sideway glances, as if he wanted to slip into a house of ill repute without being seen. But the courthouse was worse than a brothel. Bonjour, Yabshara, a friendly voice greeted us from behind as we were going up the courthouse steps. And marhaba ya Nicola, look how you've grown. You'll soon be as tall as your father. It was Aleko Zarife, my mother's young cousin, just what my father needed now. Someone to witness our humiliation. Aleko was always friendly and was strikingly good looking, like Gary Cooper, a young man who always liked to play and joke with us younger ones. We looked up to him. What a wonderful coincidence, said my father. He forced a smile. What are you doing here, Aleko? Ah, it's these fishermen, you know, dynamite. This morning, we caught a couple of them throwing sticks of dynamite into the sea. Boom. How can anyone fish like that? You have to feel sorry for them. Just imagine, one of them lit the fuse, but waited too long. It cost him 2 fingers. What's that about? I asked him. Dynamite fishing is a very dirty business, Nicholas. The people who do it are very poor and desperate. They don't have anything else. But if somebody has to stoop so low, he should at least figure out how to do it properly. People don't really have a feel for the right moment to toss the stick. And before you know it, you've lost a few fingers. He held up his hand as if he'd lost 3 fingers. I've seen it so often. 1-0 for the fish, we call these accidents. He was always joking. He worked for the British Mandate in the administration, more precisely, the fisheries department. As a young man fresh out of university, as a job as a qa'im, hakam, or civil servant was a dream come true. A job in the administration meant that you had career prospects, could earn a living and marry well. Life was on the right track. Aleko got the job through my mother Rose. She invited her uncle from the city government to dinner, took him aside and whispered a few words into his ear. The man nodded with his eyes closed and smiled to himself. Some life trajectories are set in place with just a small request. The fisheries department where Aleko had his office was under the British Mandate for Palestine, founded in the early 20th century and approved after World War I by the League of Nations. It was meant to ensure welfare and development. Britain obtained the mandate in 1922, and that's why all the top positions in the city administration were occupied exclusively by the British. Their deputies were Palestinians, including various relatives of my mother, 3 powerful uncles. They did all the work and pulled the strings, while the British sipped their tea and sat around feeling superior and puffing their cigars in smoke-filled rooms. Aleko raised his hand and rushed up the stairs of the courthouse to a courtroom where a dynamite fisherman was about to be tried. My father and I watched his slim figure disappear behind the door. Father, I said sheepishly, Aleko completely forgot to ask us why we're here. No, he did not. He has good manners and zoq, the Arab sense of tact. Zoq is basically a way of being, a concept in the Arab world. Arabic as a language in itself is expressive, flowery and beautifully rich, but zoq is the art of leaving things unsaid. Some circumstances demand special phrases, ritualized questions and answers that show whether you are educated or a half-wit. This specific sequence of good wishes and praise keeps a conversation going. Arabic can sound sharp and guttural to the ears of people who don't know the language, but to those who choose to find out, it reveals its many secrets. A euphonic sound composed like a symphony with a melodious crescendo and diminuendo. The content and sequence of exchanges is a sign of mutual respect. The greeting, peace be with you, inevitably meets with the response, upon you be the peace. When somebody steps out of the bath or shower or comes out of the hairdresser, you would say na'iman, which means approximately, may softness descend upon you. If someone is going on a journey, you say to the family of the traveler, may the person who departed be returned to you. The customary response is tla'il khair, and may you find peace. When somebody talks about something unpleasant, like an illness or loss or death, the sentences always end with ba'id min hon, may harm be far from here. It is particularly important when complimenting someone or mentioning something good that happened to someone else to add, in the name of God. This shows your counterpart that you're not envious. Envy is seen as very inelegant, something that immediately awakens the evil eye and attaches itself to you like an oil stain on a white shirt. When the conversation turns to children, it is advisable to repeat the word smallah, in the name of God, so as to make sure with every syllable that no harm comes to them. Smallah, smallah, and once more, smallah. People who don't use these ritual phrases, of which there are dozens, or even don't know them, are called balazo, tactless.
Thank you, Nadine. Really, it is so touching to hear the conversational language that you are using in your book to bring it down to a level where we can identify with the story, but also read and be educated about what really was going on at the time, how people were affected at a human level, at the core. I think this narrative, the storytelling nature of the book and the language that you are using certainly can help bring a more effective understanding of this bitter history. And we need to make sure that people do not get confused. I think they need to understand that this is a story that reflects the real struggle that has happened and that is ongoing. So thank you so much for sharing these passages with us. And I would encourage all of us to make ourselves I hope we can order it on Amazon or somewhere where we can get a copy to start reading the full story. We look forward to more of that. Ambassador Feda, do you have any last words you want to share with Nadine?
Thank you, Ambassador Neville. And I do want to, before we close, to express our warm thanks to Nadine for the presentation of her book, Oranges from Jaffa, and for the poignant reflections she's shared with us. We're also grateful to all of the participants that joined our discussion today, to all the UN delegations and others. And again, thank you to you, Ambassador Neville, and to the Bureau and Committee and the UN Division for Palestinian Rights for all their support to the Palestinian people. I think that we, gathering here for this book talk, but as you noted earlier, as part of our commemorations of the Nakba, and Nadine has graciously shared the story of her family through the eyes of her father at the time of the Nakba, but we need to be reminded of the UN's responsibility towards the question of Palestine, and that is a permanent responsibility until a just solution is achieved in line with international law and UN resolutions. And that responsibility, as we've discussed today, regrettably remains unfulfilled as the Nakba that befell the Palestinian people following the 2 world wars and the General Assembly's decision to partition historic Palestine in 1947 continues to this day, depriving generations of their fundamental human rights and forcing on them the misery of exile from their homes and homelands as refugees, and the misery of an illegal, inhumane colonial occupation and apartheid regime. And it is time for accountability and time for justice and time to address the root causes of this historic injustice. And as we think about future generations in the midst of the crises and challenges facing our world today, as the UN is doing now in its preparations for the Summit of the Future, we cannot forget history. And this story that Nadine has shared reminds us of that history and of our obligations to past generations. We need to do justice by them in order to ensure justice for the present generations and for future generations, and ensure the better, peaceful, dignified life all people are entitled to equally and without exception, including the Palestinian people. And I once again thank you, Nadine, for joining us, for sharing this rich story with us, and do encourage others to read it. And Nadine has promised some copies that I will hopefully be able to share with the Bureau and committee members soon. Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Neville.
Thank you, Ambassador Abdelhadi Nasir, for your comments, and I couldn't agree more with everything you have said. Absolutely a stark reminder of a struggle unfinished. Excellencies, dear colleagues, friends, we have come to the end of this virtual event. Ms. Sayegh, I want to thank you once again for sharing your personal story and for this very insightful discussion about such difficult topic that still resonates 75 years later in the heart and minds of millions of Palestinians, and to all those who are in solidarity with the Palestinian people. Your account has been really enlightening, and it has once again highlighted the importance of women, the perspective that women bring, and the contribution that women bring to the achievement of a just and peaceful solution to the question of Palestine, until we realize the objectives of the 2 states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace and security, with East Jerusalem as the capital of the Palestinian state. It's been an honor to chair this presentation today. The committee stands ready to continue to support these activities, and we as usual, with the Secretariat, will prepare a summary of this discussion that will be posted on the committee's website and disseminated via social media. We look forward to your ongoing engagement and to welcome you in future activities of the committee, in particular the events to commemorate the Nakba that we will convene on the 15th of May. And I'd like to repeat, the 15th of May, that is mandated by the General Assembly for that occasion. And I once again thank all the participants for spending time today with us to learn about this interesting, fascinating, historical journey to a life and a time when people in Palestine knew a life different from what we now are experiencing for the last 75 years and more. Thanks for all your attendance, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. This meeting is now adjourned, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day or evening wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.